When it comes to electrification, Volvo has arguably been more aggressive than the average luxury car company. For 2022, pretty much every model around the world is going to start with at least a mild hybrid system. There are a few exceptions there. Plug-in hybrids are available throughout the world in just about everything in the lineup. In the United States, you can get a plug-in hybrid in everything except the XC40, because the XC40 is available as a full electric vehicle, and the new C40, that's electric only. Coming up soon, there's going to be a sort of replacement for the XC90 that's going to give you 3 rows and plug-in hybrid and full battery electric options. And you can bet that when this XC60 gets redesigned on that new platform, it's going to follow suit. But today I'm here to talk about Volvo's new 455 horsepower plug-in hybrid system in this 2022 XC60 Recharge. This particular model is the new extended range version, and for some reason that's the only way you could tell the two apart. They didn't decide to make this a 2022 and a half vehicle, although for clarity, occasionally I might call this a 2022 and a half. Volvo didn't simply bump the range with a bigger battery pack or put a little twist on the electric motor here and there. They replaced almost the entire hybrid system. Now for a slight detour while I talk about plug-in hybrid systems. There is a lot of debate in the green community about whether plug-in hybrids should exist or not. Some studies say that plug-in hybrids end up yielding more greenhouse emissions than a regular gasoline vehicle in the same segment. But a lot of that really just depends on how you plan on using your plug-in hybrid. If you buy one simply because it has 455 horsepower and you never plug it in, then yes, a plug-in hybrid like this probably doesn't make too much sense, and you should just buy the one without the plug-in hybrid system. On the other hand, if you are the kind of person that religiously plugs this in at home, plugs it in at the office, then you're going to be operating most of the time in electric-only mode, and only when you need extra power, when you're driving it more sportily on your favorite winding mountain road, or when you're going on a longer road trip, will the gasoline engine kick in. And there, you're definitely going to have a big impact on emissions. This new XC60 gives you an all-electric range of 35 miles, which according to ABC polls is just about right for the average American to do their complete daily driving in electric-only mode, as long as you're gentle on the throttle. The same plug-in hybrid system in Volvo's S60 sedan and V60 wagon will give you 41 miles of range. In the XC90, amazingly, 35 miles just like this one, and in the S90, you'll get 38 miles. Logically, plug-in hybrids should be considered a bridge technology between regular hybrids and full battery electric vehicles, and that's exactly what Volvo considers their plug-in hybrids. A rational reason to buy a plug-in hybrid is, again, because you might want the security of gasoline and the ability to do those longer road trips, but you want to mitigate or reduce your amount of gasoline that you consume. But there's also a slight environmental and supply logistics side, I guess you could say. For every full battery electric vehicle that is built out there that has a nearly 100 kilowatt hour battery, you could build more than 5 of these, because this battery pack here is just over 18 kilowatt hours. I should say just under 19 kilowatt hours. And that is considerably smaller, considerably lighter, uses fewer resources, etc., than the average full battery electric vehicle. And because of the way hybrids and plug-in hybrids use their battery, this battery pack is likely going to have a longer lifetime than the battery in a full battery electric vehicle. Because even as this battery ages, if you can't put 100% capacity in it anymore, if it drops down to 90 or so, you'll still end up with an efficient hybrid system under the hood. And you'll still have the same range because the gas tank's in the back, and after this battery is exhausted, after that 35 miles, you'll still be able to drive down the road. So if you're worried about any of those sorts of things, but you do want to move towards electrification, plug-in hybrids like this do make sense. And this is where I will say sometimes shoppers are a little bit odd, because I can't count the number of times where I've heard people brag about their plug-in hybrid. Usually it's a Chevy Volt, and they will say, I'm glad I got the plug-in hybrid because I have the freedom to do whatever, but then I never use the gasoline engine. I'm driving 99.999% in electric-only mode, so I never use that gasoline engine. Then why do you have one? If you want to do that, then buy an XC40 Recharge or the C40 Recharge. This is logically designed for the person that isn't quite sure, wants to make that transition, wants to make it happen slowly, but still wants the umbilical connected to the gas pump. Aside from the battery pack and the rear electric motor, the rest of the hybrid magic happens under the hood. We have a 2-liter 4-cylinder engine just like we had in Volvo's previous plug-in hybrid system, but they have now deleted the supercharger. This is now just a turbocharged 312 horsepower engine. Efficiency is the logical reason for deleting the supercharger, and that's the likely reason that this gets 1 mile per gallon better than the outgoing model at 28 miles per gallon combined. The supercharger was there in the first place in order to help give you low-end torque and help fill out things before the turbocharger got spinning, but now we have a bigger electric motor in the rear, so it's more capable of doing that torque fill at lower RPMs and when the engine is off. The rear electric motor is now rated for 143 horsepower, giving this a combined system total of 455 horsepower and a whopping 523 pound-feet of torque. Now, the majority of that is still happening on the front axle, but now the rear axle produces way more power than it did before, so it certainly feels more balanced out on the road. That 18.8 kilowatt-hour battery pack also adds something extra to the XC90 that it didn't have before, the ability to get the full federal tax credit. Previously, the tax credit on this was limited to about $5,400, now it goes up to $7,500. And because this only increased about $500 in MSRP versus the previous system, for most folks, this is going to be less expensive than the outgoing model, while giving you 55 more horsepower and a whole heap more torque. As I said before, electric range comes in at 35 miles of range, and that compares very favorably to the Lexus NX 450h. That will give you 37 miles of range, so just 2 more than this. In real-world driving, they're basically going to be the same. But once the battery is exhausted, that will be more efficient due to the design of the drivetrain, 36 mpg in that vehicle. You should know, however, that once the battery is exhausted, you're left with considerably less power than we find in this. Even if this battery was completely flat, you'd still have 312 horsepower. That's not exactly what's going on in the Lexus, and you will certainly notice the difference if you forgot to plug in before you went up the Continental Divide in Colorado, or if you went up to Tahoe in California. Charging the battery is an onboard level 2 charger. The connection's right over there on the driver's side front fender. The charger's located under here somewhere. It's a 3.6 kilowatt charger, however. That is one thing to keep in mind. I kind of wish Volvo had made one a little bit faster. Now let's talk about how this hybrid system works. So we have a turbocharged engine over here. Then next to it, we have an 8-speed automatic transmission. Basically the same 8-speed automatic that we find in a regular non-hybrid Lexus NX, interestingly enough. It's made by Aisin, and there is an integrated starter generator motor unit in this combination. So that's how the vehicle charges the battery when it's at a stop. That's how it supplies power to the other accessories. The engine turns, it turns the motor generator unit that generates power, can either charge the battery or it can send it around to the rear electric motor, wherever it's needed. As its name implies, the motor is also responsible for helping start the engine rapidly and adding a little bit of torque fill to help get things going when you really floor it from a stop. Of course, the electric motor in the back now has been bumped up to 143 horsepower, and when you're in electric-only mode, that is the only thing driving the XC60 forward, and of course, Volvo's other plug-in hybrids that use this same system. So interestingly, when this is in gasoline-only mode, it's front-wheel drive. When it's electric-only, it's rear-wheel drive. And when it's in hybrid mode, it's all-wheel drive, sending the power wherever it might be needed based on the most efficient principle at the time. On the inside, the drive modes are no longer controlled via a little scrolly wheel here at the center console. They're now done via the new Google infotainment system in the center console. You can see we have 5 basic drive modes: hybrid, power, that's basically sport mode, pure is EV only mode, off-road, constant all-wheel drive, and then sort of drive modes. Down here we have some ways to control the battery. We can let the car decide what to do, we can have it hold the charge, or we can even charge the battery. Now, one thing to keep in mind with the pure mode is the way you control whether or not this stays in EV mode is with your right foot on the accelerator pedal. So if you don't want to get out of EV mode, you have to pay attention to the little graph over here on the instrument cluster. When the line goes all the way up to the top and you press more on the accelerator pedal, it's going to turn on the hybrid system. There is no way to lock the engine out, like we do find in some hybrids. I don't find that to be too much of a problem because I have the ability to control my right foot. As you'd expect out of a luxury car company headquartered in Sweden, they've designed these drive modes, off-road and constant all-wheel drive, for stickier situations, adverse weather, mild off-roading, etc. And those modes definitely differentiate this from the system that we find in the RAV4 Prime or the Lexus NX 450h. Yes, those vehicles do have a mild off-road mode, but not to the same level and not to the same capability level, because in this vehicle, until you exceed 286 horsepower approximately of total system output, it can balance that 50-50 front and rear. Some of it's coming from the gasoline engine up front, the remainder from the 143 horsepower electric motor in the back. That was really the big party trick when Volvo first launched their plug-in hybrid systems a number of years ago. It had a slightly less powerful electric motor in the rear, just under 90 horsepower, but it still meant that you could deliver 200 horsepower basically total to the system almost, and balance that almost equitably front and rear. You'll really notice that if you're on the trail that I took to get down here, or if you're in icy or slippery conditions, where you could put this in the constant all-wheel drive mode and it's going to feel very, very sure-footed, and very different from a Lexus hybrid system in the regular hybrid NX or the hybrid Lexus RX, which you could also see as a direct competitor to this XC60. Here's what's going on. Not only do we have a less powerful electric motor in the back of those models, but if we're talking about a regular Toyota hybrid system, the battery pack is quite small. It's about 1.5 kilowatt hours, maybe 1 kilowatt hour usable. This one, 18.8. And this battery pack can dissipate about 143 horsepower. It can power this along in electric-only mode over 80 miles an hour, etc. Decent acceleration in electric-only mode. So it has the oomph to drive that rear electric motor as you probably would in daily driving. Then it also has the gasoline engine up front, but it does not need to spin the front tires in order to send power to the rear, and that's what the Lexus system does in the RX. If the front tires are slipping and power needs to go to the back, you have to dig deeper into the throttle, get the engine spun up in order to generate power, send it to the rear electric motor, because the battery cannot deliver power in its own right to what's required for that situation in the rear. The result is front tires spinning an awful lot. Finally, the rear tires will spin up a little bit, and it results in a really peculiar feel, especially if you're in sand, something like that. You could end up digging the front tires in, and you won't do that to the same extent in this hybrid system. Since we've already been talking about the all-wheel drive modes, let's talk about that out on the road here first. I'm in constant all-wheel drive mode right now, so it's going to not just try and send more power to the rear axle, it's also going to try to keep the battery state of charge higher, because again, the battery is key to making this system work in this way. And it's again what's differentiating this from a regular hybrid version of the Lexus NX or the Lexus RX. The big difference between the constant all-wheel drive and the off-road mode is that we get hill descent control in the off-road mode, and it's going to raise the suspension up a little bit, but it's also going to reduce the ride quality. So unless you actually need the extra suspension, constant all-wheel drive is going to be just fine for snow, ice, rain, adverse weather, etc. I've seen a few videos out there where some folks try to take the XC60 or the XC90 a little too far off the beaten path, and I would remind you that if you're going to bring up those kind of videos, this vehicle was not designed with that in mind. This is not a Land Rover, it's not a Range Rover, it's not a Jeep. This is designed to be an entirely capable plug-in hybrid luxury crossover, doing the kinds of things that the average crossover shopper would want, whether you live down a gravel road, whether you want to go to a national park, whether you're on surfaces like this frequently, or you just want extra security in rain, snow, ice, etc. That's what this system is designed for. It's not designed to be a rock crawling system. So no locking differentials, the stability and traction control system definitely intervenes early, and it's not designed to just easily handle situations where there's just one wheel up in the air. This car is going to assume if one wheel's up in the air, something went wrong. But you will notice on a road surface like this, where it is definitely loose, if I floor it, the front tires aren't just scrabbling for traction. The vehicle is balancing that power front and rear. And if I put this in, for instance, let's move over here to the hybrid mode, where it's not going to try and balance power 50-50 and I floor it, then we do get front wheel spin and not rear wheel spin. If things are a little bit less controlled, it's still very capable, and on this road surface, regular hybrid mode is just fine, and it's going to send power where it's needed if the wheels are slipping. But if you want to send power around before the wheels slip, that's what constant all-wheel drive is for. The mode most of you want to know about, however, is power mode. So when you put your foot in it, you get heaps of it, 455 horsepower, and you will get just a modicum of front wheel slip right off the line. 0 to 60, according to Volvo, in this model should be a full half-second faster than the outgoing XC60 Recharge. Now, interesting twist, Volvo is limiting all their vehicles to a top speed of around 112 miles an hour. So the quarter mile time, it's not necessarily going to be any faster, and if you plan on drag racing your plug-in hybrid European luxury crossover, this might not be the option for you, because Volvo has decided that, well, they definitely want vehicles that fulfill the desire for something quicker. They're interested also in safety, and they consider those really high top speeds that you found in Volvos before perhaps a little bit less wise, so they've dialed that back a bit. But they haven't, interestingly enough, dialed back the fun level here. Thanks to the more power that we get out back, this feels punchier than the previous model, even when the transmission is downshifting, and that's the big benefit to that larger electric motor in the back, is that while the transmission is shifting and there's not as much power coming from the engine, it's all being filled in by that electric motor in the back. There have been some minor improvements in terms of the hybrid system refinement as well, so transmission shifts definitely appear to be a little bit quicker and a little bit smoother in this generation. The engine can still sound a little bit gruff, but honestly, so does everybody else's four-cylinder engine. The engine noise is a little bit more muted in this model. I'm not sure if that's the lack of the supercharger or some other minor changes under the hood, but it does appear to be a little bit more refined, and I've never really found it to be a problem, to be honest. Over a day of driving this XC60 down here in Palm Springs, I was able to get 36 miles out of this battery, driving it relatively gently. But I will say that relatively gently is not as gentle as you had to before, because a lot more power in the back means that you can easily accelerate from a stoplight and be the head of the pack when you're leaving that stoplight and still stay in electric only mode. If you want to be absolutely sure, however, that you stay in electric only mode, you do have to really watch your right foot, because this does not have that mode, like I said, to keep you in electric only mode. It will never isolate the gasoline engine from the equation like you can in some plug-in hybrids. I have met a number of people that are truly offended by that decision by Volvo. I don't find it to be a problem, because in my mind, if you floor it, you want full acceleration, and that's exactly what this car is going to give you. If you didn't want full acceleration, why'd you floor it? A less obvious benefit from this new drivetrain arrangement is that although we still get a little bit of torque steer up front, because there's a lot of power going on the front, it's muted versus the previous model. I think there's not quite as much torque happening on the front axle, certainly not as much at lower RPMs versus the turbo and supercharged engine, and then more power in the back just helps balance that out. And Volvo has definitely recalibrated the way that power is sent around this system to keep you going in a reliably straight line. When the road starts to get a little bit more fun and you dig deeper in the throttle, you'll also notice that by sending more power to the rear, this can push the vehicle around a corner in a way that it could not before. It could always give the rear a little bit of a nudge with that smaller electric motor in the back, but the bigger battery and the more powerful electric motor allow that to happen at higher speeds, at higher throttle applications, etc., and it really improves the fun factor. In case you're wondering, yes, you will notice a difference in moderate driving to slightly aggressive driving between hybrid and power mode. Power is going to be a little bit more aggressive at sending power to the rear axle, so you'll notice that slight push in the rear, that slight bit of yaw motion ability. That's going to be a little bit more exaggerated in the power mode, but either way, handling in the XC60 is absolutely excellent. Now, this is not going to be as sharp or as direct as a Stelvio or an X3 or a Mercedes-Benz GLC, but I certainly prefer the feel in here to something like the Acura RDX or the Lexus NX, or honestly, the Audi Q5 plug-in hybrid. I think this simply feels better. As far as efficiency goes, theoretically 28 miles per gallon is what you should be able to get after the battery pack has been exhausted. So far, even romping on the throttle all day long after I exhausted the battery, I've been averaging about 26 mpg, so I consider that an absolute win for this drivetrain. As always, your mileage will vary. It's going to depend greatly on your driving style and, of course, the terrain that you live in. If you live in a hilly area, you may get slightly better fuel economy because of the ability to regen brake and store that energy going downhill. Or, depending on your ability to plug the vehicle in, the battery may actually be getting you lower fuel economy in some of those driving situations simply because of the fact that you have more weight to carry around. However, in the average driving cycle, this is still going to get you better fuel economy than the non-hybrid XC60. So even if you never have the ability to plug it in, this is likely still going to save you fuel. Just not as much fuel, and it's not going to have as big of an impact on emissions as if you actually were able to plug it in all the time. A decent number of people that I've talked to recently about Volvo's plug-in hybrid systems are offended that they don't have a mode to keep you in EV-only mode. It will turn on the gasoline engine if you push harder on your right foot. To them, I say, don't push on the pedal so hard. It's pretty easy to keep this in EV mode if you want to, and if you want that extra power, why should I have to engage a different mode in order to get the power? Honestly, it's not a big deal either way. It's more of just a personal preference there, but I do find that this system makes a little bit more sense to me. The way that Volvo has tuned the throttle pedal, it's pretty easy to get it to stay in EV mode if that's what you want to do. EV mode is available to a little over 80 miles an hour, and you can get 0 to 60 in EV mode in about 10 seconds or so. Again, I'll have official numbers once I get this at home. 10 seconds may not sound great, but again, for your average daily commute, that's going to be just fine. If you want the extra pep, floor it, you get 455 horsepower, you'll get 0 to 60 around 4.5 just over seconds. But if you don't want to do that, you have that option. Before we go, I should talk about Volvo's new one-pedal drive feature. Apparently this is a feature that a lot of folks have been asking for. I'm not the biggest fan of one-pedal drive, but here's how it works. You put the transmission into the B mode, so you're in drive, you pull it back one more click to B, then you make sure that the creep option is off in the infotainment system, then you get the one-pedal drive. If you don't have that option off, then once the vehicle slows down to the point where regen braking can no longer slow you down, it will just sort of coast along and you have to put your foot on the brake pedal. Now in B mode, it is not engaging actual max regeneration at the time. There is still a little bit more regen capability in the system, but this has a blended braking system, so that's engaged by putting your right foot on the brake pedal. So even if you brake more aggressively than B mode gives you, you're still recapturing a lot of that energy into the battery. And that's because, again, this has a blended braking system like most EVs outside the Tesla envelope. So whenever your foot is on the brake pedal, regardless of the mode or whether you have that one pedal thing on or off, it's still going to be regenerating power into the battery. Only when those regen limits are exceeded is it going to engage the friction brakes and use those to stop the vehicle. Things are a little bit different in the average Tesla because Tesla chose not to have a blended braking system. So anytime you're using the brake pedal, it's friction brakes. The throttle lift-off regen that you get, that is all you get in a modern Tesla. This is not like that. This is like every other EV sold in the US. If you haven't already done so, be sure and hit that subscribe button down there at the bottom of your screen and let me know what you think about this style of content. Would you like to see more of it? Would you like to see more of a complete review, etc.? Let me know all your thoughts down there, and of course, I will see you all next week.